There's a lot happening right now within Egypt. You had some great thoughts. Excuse me. You had some great thoughts, observations over lunch that we were talking through. What is it about Egypt that you think is like the biggest single thing for you that you'd like to cover on this show?
Yeah, Egypt is. I mean, it's got most of the world's attention right now. Everyone that's not infighting about politics and stuff are really. I mean, it really nurtures the imagination because we look at these pyramids. These aren't some things that we're reading about in books. You can go there and touch them. They exist. They are so big. They're so massive. They're so beautiful, and they're so precisely created with mathematics and sacred geometry. There's so much to them that makes it obvious that they're not typical. They were built for a very specific purpose. In fact, things like the fact that it's actually an 8-sided pyramid. It doesn't have 4 sides. That each side in the very center is bowed out by like 1 degree, and you can only see that on the spring and fall equinoxes of each year, and you can only see it from directly above because when the sun hits it at just the right time of the day, it casts a shadow and it turns into an 8-sided pyramid. Why?
Yeah.
Why did they do that? So there's so many anomalies and so many things that are just so fascinating that how could you not be in love with it? And now,
Ancient architects. I think it was ancient architects. Matt Simpson, who I've been in contact with for a couple of years now. Very very smart guy. He's challenged that on one of his videos, and I didn't get to a conclusion on it or research it enough. But I think what he was basically saying was that potentially rainfall for the last several thousand years coming off of the top of the pyramid could have carved little channels out of each of the 4 sides. And that, of course, you're going to see it on the equinox because it faces directly north-south, but it's like east-west. But I don't know, man.
but all 4 sides wouldn't be carved out identically,
Yeah,
right? That would be pretty amazing.
yeah. I don't know. I don't know. But
It's possible.
It's an interesting. I was blown away by the equinox thing, and then kind of started to think about what the pyramid might have actually looked like in its heyday, and then it was just a little bit of a downer to watch that other video. But I don't know what.
Well, it's not just that. You have to take it all in. So the Sphinx is aimed due east, right? Like perfectly situated. And on the spring equinox, the sun comes up over the horizon perfectly in the gaze of the Sphinx. I mean, just dead eye. So the Sphinx was perfectly positioned for the spring equinox. And on that same day, the 4-sided pyramid turns into an 8-sided pyramid. I can't think that that's a coincidence. That's very precise.
Right.
And there has to be a reason for it. Because why would they do that? I mean, you're not talking about moving Lego bricks around. These things were built from the ground up very precisely with a big picture point of view. These weren't temporary buildings. And I think that's something that's hard for modern humans to wrap their minds around, that scope and scale of a construction project, an engineering project, a design project, and what they built it for. What was the purpose? So I think just base level, it's very fascinating and very inspiring. And then there's obviously a bunch of mystique around it. Edgar Cayce talks about how under the right paw, in between the right paw and the Nile, there's the Atlantean Archive. So the Hall of Records, what he called it, which was basically what the survivors of the Atlanteans put in there. He believes they built the pyramids and the Sphinx, and that they put that library in there as a record of human history, how the last cataclysm unfolded, how the Atlanteans contributed to it, and also how they survived it. And that this was information that at a certain time humans would get access to again because it would be pertinent because they believe this is a cyclical type of a cataclysm or a reset. So Edgar Cayce's talking about that. So that's very interesting. He was a sleeping prophet. He made some pretty accurate predictions in the past.
Yep.
Not all of them, but if you believe that our future is probabilistic and not deterministic, you'll understand that you can't predict the future. You can just predict probabilities, and you can get close sometimes. But the fact a lot of his big predictions came true gives him some credibility, and he's a very fascinating guy. So there's a guy named Stephen Schwartz, who is one of the most famous remote viewers of all time. He's done some big projects, 2050 projects, one of his biggest ones, seeing this, cyclical cataclysm and reset coming up in the future. And he worked for the Navy as a remote viewer for them. And he was tasked with his team of remote viewers. He has like an army of remote viewers and a special system called Mobius that he uses to parse through the data. It's amazing. And he's predicted all sorts of things, even found many archaeological sites. He actually has a book, something along the lines of remote viewing for archaeology, something like that. You would love it. Super fascinating. And he was tasked to remote view underneath the Sphinx for the same purpose. So that's really interesting. And then SRI, Stanford Research Institute, who did Project Stargate and all that, they were even tasked to come and investigate below the Sphinx using acoustical methods, not even remote viewing, because they'd already done all that. So there's a big emphasis on what's underneath the Sphinx. So I was paying attention to all this, and then Ryan Bledsoe, who's a good friend of mine. I've done several podcasts with him and hung out with him at the Monroe Institute. Got to know his dad, Chris. Chris Bledsoe is such a genuine, just one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And love his story.
Yeah.
And he talks about the lady, and the lady told him that a new knowledge would be bestowed upon humanity, and it was going to happen at the Sphinx. When the gaze of the Sphinx, and they talk about the Red Star Regulus and all the stuff. And so I dove into all that. And because she said it could be around Easter of 2026, which is right around the corner. So it's like, okay, so that's fascinating. We'll know pretty soon if any of this is true or not. So I started looking into it, and I was like, okay, she talks about a new knowledge would be bestowed upon humanity that was going to be very important. And I was like, okay, what's this new information going to be? Like, is the lady going to come down and give some celestial TED talk and just tell us all this stuff? It's like, I doubt it. It doesn't seem like her style. She's a little more mysterious. Like a typical woman, right? Likes to stay out of the scene, a little more mysterious, more questions than answers. So I was like, she's not just going to tell us everything. So what is this new information that's going to come from this Sphinx? When you start to put it all together and you realize, oh, maybe it's not the Sphinx, maybe it's not the lady, maybe it's the archive underneath the Sphinx. And the paw is supposed to be the doorway, and it leads to this tunnel, and somewhere in between the paw and the Nile is this Atlantean archive, the Hall of Records. So anyways, I don't know, but that would make sense of where this information is coming from, why the Sphinx is so important. So then I started looking into, she said around Easter. Well, March 20th is the spring equinox. And obviously the Sphinx is aligned perfectly with the spring equinox. It seems to activate certain things at that area. That's 2 weeks before Easter, because I heard Chris say around Easter. And people go back and forth and argue all about the dates. And he's even kind of changed it to fall and back to spring and back to fall. So no one really knows, but it's interesting because there seems to be a lot of converging, like why was Stephen Shorts, tasked by the military or the government to remote view the Sphinx? Why did SRI go in there and analyze it? Why are they finding all this stuff underneath the pyramid now? And then the whole Atlantean archive and the new knowledge being bestowed. I was like, hey, we'll know pretty soon, but a lot of arrows are pointing to Egypt right now.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, it's captivated the world's attention right now for a number of different reasons. Those underground scans being one of them. I'm not sure what to believe about that. The guys want to come on the show, and I'm sure we'll make it happen. And a lot of respect for the science that they're doing there. I've just talked to so many people that have explanations that it's like. So I just don't know what to think on that. The idea of there being tunnels underneath the Giza Plateau and the pyramid is, I think everybody's there. Like we all know that there's, tunnels and chambers and whatnot. Are there 2 mile long vertical, is there a spacecraft made of metal that's 50 feet and 40 feet long, in Hawara? Maybe. Maybe.
I wish they would just let us do a little digging because there's one way to find out.
There's one way to find out. We need to understand what's in Hawara for sure, because that place is just going to be just loaded with history. That would have been, like Herodotus said, it dwarfed the pyramids in grandeur, So and that's real. That exists. That's under there. We know that. We have scans of that now. The only question is, what else? How do you get there? Why did we cover it up? Why did Hawass not come out and? He knew it for over 10 years now. I think that's been there, and so I would think that the world might want to pool some money together to divert that ditch or whatever, the canal or whatever it is, out of that area, and then rebuild it somewhere else, and then excavate. Like we all want to know what's down there.
Like I said, why would they hide it?